Welcome to The First Turn. I'm your host, Hyena, and today, Llama and I are talking about This Week in Warhammer. If you like what you hear, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share, or let us know if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about. Alright, let's get to it.
Hey, welcome to The First Turn. I'm Hyena.
I'm Llama.
Today we're talking about Warhammer stuffs.
What?
God, a couple weeks have been slow.
Long overdue.
You know, it's interesting where like most years wrap up. There's very little being released and teased and coming out new.
Yeah.
But New Year's, man, they pump out packed, crazy amounts of stuff. Packed. I mean, we had the Krieger stuff.
Eldari.
The Eldari like aspect stuff coming out. We've got
They snuck in Orcs Worklands.
Orcs Workland came in there, which not much came out with them, but
Terrain.
It's a new book, it's a new terrain piece, whatever, new endless spells. But we've got Soulblight coming out soon, which
Gloomspite
is packed
gets
with stuff.
yeah.
Gloomspite gets packed
all the
with
dogs.
stuff.
Yeah.
So like New Year's end up being released with tons and tons and tons of stuff.
And we've got Adepticon around the corner, which will be more.
Yeah. So Adepticon, I'm so excited.
So excited.
I'm getting pumped. It's only a few weeks away now. Like it's coming up.
We're like 6 weeks.
Really soon.
Yeah.
Do I think I can get a Golden Demon entry and like done in time?
I think you could. I mean, if you put in
3 hours every day.
If you put in
2 hours every day.
So 10 hours, 20 hours. No. So like 14 hours a week, 6 weeks. Oh yeah. You could do a Golden Demon. Yeah.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna
do it.
I'm trying to pump something out.
Because you haven't entered that. Do it.
That's right.
When it's your first time, the idea is to just do it, see where you're at.
I think I might do something like Sakar, the vampire with a snake, something like that. So a character like that's kind of underrepresented.
Who's Sakar?
It's the vampire that infiltrated. What's his name? The Ghoul King's court.
Usharon's
court.
Oh yeah,
with the snake. The snake
yeah.
Who's like a
she's a Soulblight Gravelord, but works with the
Flesh Eater
quartz
to siphon off the blood from Usharon to create Ghoul Curse wine to spread throughout the cities of Sigmar to corrupt the humans into being undead. And it's wild.
By the way, if that doesn't tell you something, people, go read Age of Sigmar fluff. Yeah. If you've been averse to the universe and or a curmudgeon about like the old world leaving and all that, like Age of Sigmar fluff is fantastic.
Yeah, that's really good stuff.
Some of those like subterfuge and intrigue and these characters who are crossing over into multiple factions, so good.
Yeah. But Sakar is its own like sort of sub-faction kind of character who's just a vampire lord, but has some more going on there. She is a right hand of Neferata. So she's like that kind of Lamian sort of vampire who wants to play at politics more than martial prowess.
And she's been around for a long time, Neferata.
And so it's a very interesting character, very interesting stories about her. But it's
Khalida who hated Neferata?
Yes.
Khalida's from the Tomb Kings. Yeah, she's gone.
Yeah.
But I remember even in Total War, she does that. Like, I want Neferata's head or whatever.
Khalida was, I think, Neferata's sister who... They both went like different routes, right? One went into like the undead path of like the mummification sort of route. The other one went into the vampire route. I think Neferata ended up being the first vampire. I think she was the first vampire proper, and she was a very manipulative, spread the curse, have a coven of lesser vampires sort of vampire, and like played the politics. Because Nagash, who was a necromancer and a leader of the cult of death of what's the kingdom called with Cetra? Shit.
Not Nehekara.
Nehekar?
Is it Nehekar?
Nehekar. Yeah. So he was like a death priest of Nehekar who was he was a son of the king, son of the emperor, whatever he's called, son of the king, but like younger son of the king, so he wasn't going to take over. He ended up doing lots of like weird experimentation and whatnot of the death cult because they venerated their dead and they like entombed them in pyramids and necropolises and stuff like that. But he was obsessed with undeath, and he created the first elixir of life that created vampire. And Neferata, I believe, was one of the first ones that imbibed the elixir and became a vampire.
That's her thing, yeah.
And then, like I said, I don't know if they were friends or if they were sisters or whatever, but Neferata and Khalida were rivals in the anime.
You're right. Neferat, I think, was the first vampire.
Yeah.
And then like all the bloodlines came.
And
after
then
that.
and then the vampires ended up leaving
Yeah.
Nakar and end up going into Sylvania and creating their own kingdoms there and creating trouble for the kingdoms of men and being high members of the courts and
the
things
more
like
classic counts and
that kind of and so this I think her name is Sakar with the snake, who was
the model's great.
a demoted god of death.
And a lot
He was
of
turned into a pet.
Well, and a lot of people did some good
Hilarious.
takes on her, and like I remember Richard Gray did a take on her, got a notable entry for her. But yeah, I haven't seen too many more, so maybe you could.
So there's that
take a
model.
crack at it.
There's the Daughters of Cain model that's like the blind witch with the wings, who is very much like what was her name in Dark Elf Lore, one of the main characters. Oh, I don't remember from Overworld, but she's like a blind crone with like feathery wings.
Yeah.
That's another great model that like I think is underrepresented, that has come out sort of recently.
Yeah.
That is just phenomenal.
I thought we'd see more of her, but we have not.
Yeah. I mean, you've got...
She doesn't see a lot.
Yeah.
Blind and all.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly. We also had Nagash... the right hand of Archeon. What's her name?
Abraxia.
Abraxia is a
My
phenomenal
queen. Yeah.
That doesn't, I don't think, see enough
No,
representation.
you're right. Yep.
You've got the sort of tree man leader, spiritual successor of
Belthanos?
Balthanos is his name, but the spiritual successor of like
Orion,
kind of, is another great model that just I feel like didn't get enough representation, enough attention. It's a phenomenal model. He's really good rules wise.
We'll see in a few weeks if people represent it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
there's
take a crack at some.
there's a
You
lot of
own
options.
almost every model
I
in
do,
existence.
Of all those we listed, I have all of them.
Yeah.
So I could potentially paint up any of them. I mean, we're also looking at the new Vermin Lord, the new any of the new Skaven models. Honestly, are phenomenal. I could see any of those.
Vizek Scour, the Vermin Lord.
Being an absolute killer at Golden Demon.
Another one, by the way, read the lore about Vizek Scour. Holy cow, what a cool
Phenomenal.
character.
So cool. Really upsets the whole Council of 13.
Yeah.
Because like for the longest time, the Council of 13 of Skaven have been kind of stagnant and kind of doing just what Screech wanted. And apparently just like this new Vermin Lord just appears kind of out of nowhere.
And
shakes
the
everything
Blade
up.
of Krennic is another Vermin Lord who is competing with Vizek Scour. So like, subterfuge and treason and all the backstabbing, which is Skaven's nature. It's funny is like chaos itself is not unified. They always have someone who's their marshal, right? In Age of Sigmar and in the Old World, you had Archeon, and then you've got like Abaddon and 40k, right? But the chaos by its nature cannot be at peace.
Right.
Cannot be.
They can't work together.
No,
I mean, look at Alpha Legion. Alpha Legion is the Skaven of 40k.
Yep.
Let's be honest.
Yeah,
like that's
exactly what it is.
Closest
we do
thing.
not need them to make 40k Skaven because
We have Alpha Legion.
A, that would be stupid, and B, we have Alpha Legion.
Yeah,
And
like their motivations are so self-serving and so mysterious that no one else understands what they're going after, why they're doing what they do, why they pop up in random places. No one can work with them because they don't know what their motivations
And
are.
so while they are agents of chaos, they do not serve anybody but themselves. And like, it's like while the Great Horned Rat has fully and canonically ascended to be a deity in the pantheon of chaos, like all the other chaos gods, it only works with the other ones because it can, because it has to, because it's convenient. But then it has its own machinations which are disruptive to everything,
including the other chaos gods.
including itself.
Itself, yeah.
Because Vizek Scour and Screech do not get along, and then the blade, or the Vermin Lord that's trapped in the blade of Krennic does not get along with it. Like, all of that is so perfectly chaos and perfectly Skaven. It's like long overdue that Skaven became a part of chaos officially.
Yeah. I would still like to see more development though, because like with the Christmas like regiments of renown, which I harp back. I love the system of regiments of renown.
Yep.
Because it gives you a way to acquire some models and play some models that you normally wouldn't be able to because it's not part of your army.
It's one of the best mercenary / ally systems I think they've ever done.
Yeah, like I said, I think I've said this before, but having units that weren't part of any army and just making them literally 100% mercenary units outside of like unaligned. This is just a regiment of renown.
It's what Dogs of War tried to be, but couldn't be.
I mean, it's basically what Gotrek is, right? Because he's not part of any army, but he's got this list of armies he can be a part of and be combined with. I wouldn't be surprised if when the new Dark Elf character model comes out for the Black Library, if there's like a regiment of renown where you can take Gotrek in most armies and his options for like units he can take is this Dark Elf mercenary.
That's a regiment.
Yeah, that's the regiment. It's just the two of those models, and it's like there's unrestricted. You can bring it in chaos, you can bring it in destruction, you can bring it wherever you want to.
Here's a 700 point or whatever regiment.
He's down to like 3.
Oh, okay.
360.
And an elf's not going to cost that much.
He is not as good as he used to be.
No. Okay.
The character might be 120.
So it'd be like a 500 point regiment. Here you go.
Yeah. There you go. But I love the system, and like I said before, it's given me so many like avenues of inspiration to create non-canonical versions of these regiments of renown that it's like, oh yeah, these are trolls and whatever, but mine are going to just be rat ogres or whatever, that kind of fulfills the role of this regiment.
We have tournament data. None of these regiments are OP. They're just,
looking at them, you can tell they're not OP.
No. But if you've ever wanted to like dabble in other models without justifying buying a whole army, the Regiments of Renown system is just great for that.
I love it. And it's not exploitable because there's no like options you can min-max. There's no like it's the best versions of allies that I've seen probably out of Games Workshop in a very long time.
It's what they need to be, where it's like none of them are must-takes, none of them are exploitable, none of them share rules.
There's just flavor.
But it's flavor, and you can add
flavor that can like fill a gap that an army might need to fill.
Yep.
Like your Skaven regiment that's just all shooting units. If you have an army that doesn't have access to any shooting units,
if you are Blades of Corn or you are Slaves to Darkness and you have like no shooting that's significant, all of a sudden it's like, hey, I can now have this Skaven weapons team and a warp whatever cannon. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
like
it's pretty solid.
But it's also like,
but you know what? You can convert that.
It's
and be
not
like,
so
like,
good.
Well, it's not a Skaven warp lightning cannon. It's a Chaos Dwarf hell cannon.
Yep.
And you convert it to be a hell cannon.
But since that old crappy Finecast model is not available anymore.
But you could convert it, right?
Yeah.
And it counts as, and be like, here's another canonical way of me bringing this regiment of renown that isn't Skaven, but it counts as.
Yep.
It creates all kind of opportunity for the
conversion,
the
hobbyist,
to create what they wanted for the longest time.
Yeah, no, the Regiments of Renown system is so good. They found a way to do this where it's not must-takes. They're not must-haves. They're not, and even though they can fill gaps, it's like not so much that you even always consider it,
right?
Because you'll still build your list and like not need it sometimes. But the hobbyist is rewarded ultimately for this Regiment of Renown thing. Yeah, so I think it's just so well executed. It's really the best way to do it, and it gives some things play that otherwise would rotate out or be faded out,
right?
And then new things like that, where it's this tidy little module, because they don't allow room for where we saw flaws in the past with this. Whether it was
there's no expansion of units and reinforcing them. There's no weapon options.
It's not like the first formations they did in 40K where like some of them gave you free models or allowed you to summon models. There's none of that.
Right.
It's like you get this, that's it. It can be good for you. You don't need it, but you could use it. You could convert it. Yeah.
There was some changes that they made back in the last data slate when was it Gloomspite Gets came out or Orc Warclans came out, where they did kind of sort of a minor update to a few armies that fixed their detachment abilities, and they fixed some of the seasonal abilities. One of the changes they made was to a new, they call it the veterans, sort of detachment ability, where like you could take like a bodyguard unit or whatever. Well, one of the ones was a benefit to monster. They added that recently. Well, they made a change to one of them that made it so that you could only apply it to monster units that were bolstered. Right? It was just the base unit. You couldn't like reinforce a unit and then still gain the benefit. Well, because there was exactly one unit in the game that was taking advantage of it, and it was too good. So, like, the benefit you got from this monster regiment thing was basically a permanent all-out attack that applied to both the rider and the monster. But people were playing Stormcast and bringing a unit of Storm Drakes, unit 2, reinforcing it up to 4 of them, which is 720 points or whatever it is, 680 points, and then having a unit of monsters, 4 monsters, that all benefited from permanent all-out attack.
Yeah.
It's like, that's too good. And so in this latest update, they changed it so it's like, only on unreinforced units can benefit from this ability. And people were like flipping out. They're like, well, the only good way you play this dragon unit is by reinforcing it and taking this thing. It's like, I disagree.
Yep.
I think their unit's fine. It's not as efficient as if you have permanent all attack, obviously. But you were exploiting a 700-point module that was like, it's kind of like when you could take too big a units in 40K and then apply a buff to them. And it was like, this unit's too good because it gets this blanket buff on this gigantic expensive unit. Like, they've taken a lot of that kind of stuff away.
What's funny is that happens in a lot of games, not just tabletop games, but even like video games, right? Where like something happens and it's multiplicative,
right?
And the reason they have to modify it or nerf it, I think the nerf term is overused, but the reason they have to do that is because it's one of those things where it's so obviously overtuned that it requires no skill,
right?
And
but it was like, the argument was like, they were unplayable before, and with this buff, they were actually too good. So without the buff, they're not good enough. It's like, well, then it's indicative of another problem.
Correct.
Right? Like, if the only way that they're good is if you do this to them,
super
to make
exploit,
them too good, then you're right. There's a problem with that unit's balance that needs to be looked at.
It's like people who believed they were good Diablo 4 players, but they were just playing Spiritborn in Season 6.
with a build that actually was interacting in such a way that it was a bug that, like, 10 times multiplied every step of the
You could push
process.
one key for your entire game sequence.
And one-shot any model in the game.
And you just deleted everything. Yeah. And like they
believed...
You weren't
good.
You weren't good. When it required one key and no skill and no farming, no nothing. Mm-hmm. It's like when that happens in a tabletop game, it's the same thing where it's like, well, there's some combination of things you can take that is so good that it's easy button.
Like Custodian.
That
I mean, for a while.
They've had builds like that.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, it was the same thing. It was a general's regiment situation, and it's like, it's a build that's so obviously good that you just auto take it, and that gives you an advantage that another player has to overcome no matter the skill disparity. That doesn't mean you're a good player, right. And that's certainly, therefore, not good for the game.
It's like when we talked about winning a game at list building, at list construction. There were certain editions of 40K and other games where like you'd win based on the matchup, right? Like you didn't have to play the game out. You knew based on what the matchup was that this army beats this other army. And like ogres beating high elves 100% of the time in Warhammer Fantasy.
7th edition, yeah.
Like if you matched up those two and it's like, oh, what's your list got? Oh, I've got a high dragon. What do you got? 2 hellblasters. It's like, okay, well, shake hands, concede. You win.
Yeah.
Because your 300 points of cannons beats my 900 point dragon on turn 1. It just kills it.
By the way, on dice, on average, almost every time.
On dice, on average, anywhere on the table.
Yeah.
Just you win.
And the other unit in my ogre army is a big block in the middle that's resistant to your spells.
Right.
And your high elves.
It's a 3-up ward against all of your spells.
So
it's got the dragon banner.
So if you go first, you do nothing.
Right.
If I go first, I delete your dragon.
Yep.
So like, shake hands.
Yeah. There was some of that in old fantasy.
Not good for the game.
Not great.
And when it happens in any game, it's funny is that people who play with it will fancy themselves good players. The people who complain about it because they have to go against it are considered salty. But then those same people who are against it are then mad when it goes away. It's a weird, like, you can't make anybody happy.
Right.
This situation, though, it was a general's regiment that was too good. But they fixed it. They not only fixed it, they gave us an extra one.
But there's still room for it to be used.
And there's still room for it to be used.
Because it's like in the one edge case of a monster unit.
Always love edging.
That is... In the one case of a monster unit that can be reinforced, which there are only like 3 total units in the game that are monsters that can be reinforced. I can think of dragons. I can think of man crusher gargants.
Yep.
I can think of Korgoraths. That's basically it. Of like the units that are monsters that can be reinforced. Maybe the sharks for Idneth count. Yep. I don't know. Maybe. But there's so few cases that this applies to that it's like it was such a small sample of like units that were taking advantage of it that like are nerfed because of it. Like there were a few units that were over taking advantage of it. And now that it's like all unreinforced units only, I think it's fair.
Well, that's just it. Like so for the people who think that GW doesn't ever like know how to write rules or look at rules, it's like look at the particulars of that situation where it's like, well, there's only like on one hand you can count the number of units that took advantage of it, but the advantage they gained was so big that all of a sudden those units were winning entire games.
Right.
That army was now skewing super favorable. It's like they looked at that and saw this is a problem. Even though it only benefits this many units, it's creating a situation where those armies are winning disproportionately because of one thing.
Right.
And like, but those armies will still be good if they lose that thing.
Yeah. And so we're going to tone that down and make it still available to armies that have monsters in them. But we don't want these 4 units being able to take advantage of this to such an extreme amount. So we're going to take it, tone it back a little bit. So it's like if you bring a unit of 2 Stormdrake Guard, you can still take advantage of this ability.
Yep.
And it's still pretty good.
And Stormdrake Guard are still pretty good.
But you can't take advantage of it to the point that half of your army is taking advantage of this one rule.
Right.
So it's fine.
And AoS more so than 40K, and I think it's by design. Universal rules like that you get from a general's regiment or that you get from a formation they're not that impactful, and they don't want them to be that impactful.
Right. That impactful. You want them to have an impact.
Yes.
But they don't want them to be like, well, you ran the game.
They don't want you to need to build your list around it.
Right.
And it was funny is we've got a friend, a local, who hasn't played AoS since like 2nd edition, since 2.0.
It's been a while.
And he had asked me about some stuff that's going on, and he went to look at some of his armies that he has models for, and he was looking at their current what do they call them, formations or battalions or their version of that.
Right.
And he was like, these are all kind of meek. And I was like,
they're all meek.
And I showed him all the armies. I was like, they're all like that right now.
Yeah.
In AoS, that army rule you pick, that subfaction rule you pick, is not that impactful. Like your rules come from the units themselves and then how you interact with where you spend your CP. And then because per phase it's most important. Which rampages you use, which counter charge you use,
which core skills you use,
which and AoS, unlike 40K, has a lot more of like I relate it to Magic the Gathering. It's these response moments. You get to like your opponent does something, you're like, wait, I'm going to spend something and do this in response. Right. And AoS,
and if you don't use that ability, that's on you as a player.
Right.
Not realizing this is a trigger moment where you could impact the game by doing something. And
AoS, it's funny, it's like the rules may be a little simpler than 40K, but the interactivity of the game is greater. There's more you can do on your opponent's turn in AoS than in any other GW game. And so like it's the closest thing they have to like fully alternating activations.
Right.
And if you're not aware of those, that's where you can lose a game.
There were so many. So the last trip I played in, there were so many times. I played an all-dragon army. It was so dumb, but it went undefeated. So I'll throw that out there. It was at RTT. It was a 3-round tournament, and I went undefeated. But with dragons, something with big health pools, it's a great candidate for things like Overrun. No, Overrun. What's it called? There's a stratagem or ability
it's the
that allows you to charge fight, and then at the end of the charge, fighting phase, break out of combat and deal mortal damage to the opponent, and then like you GTFO. It's called overrun, overpower, overcharge,
overpower.
Something.
We've had a few drinks, and we might not remember what it's called.
There are certain units that have bonuses to this. Chariots generally have some kind of interaction with this ability that allows you to like break out of combat after you've charged. But you know what? In all the games I played with my dragon army and all the charging I didn't once overrun the opponent and like get out of combat with my dragon units, because the requirement is you must have a higher health characteristic than your opponent does, or like that the unit that you're in combat with does. And there were plenty of times when I had a higher health characteristic than my opponent, and I just didn't do it. That's on me as a player. Correct. Right? Like there's plenty of times when I could have overwatched, or I could have redeployed, or broken out of combat, or whatever, done all these kind of things that I didn't do. I played suboptimally and that was on me. I can't blame anyone else, right?
Stupid RNG.
I still won all of my games.
Yeah.
Every single game, I lost the double turn. Every single game, mind you. But I played around it, right? Like the only units that I had that were like in threat range, in danger, were super tanky dragon units that I knew were going to get attacked multiple times in a row and still be able to survive, right? Like I planned around the double turn.
You know what's funny is
every single time I got double turned. I can't win an initiative roll. I can't. It just doesn't work.
You know what's funny is like we played that way when we did team events at Adepticon, even back when the double turn was devastating. We always went into every round playing with the mindset that we're going to lose a double turn.
Right.
And so like it turned out like when we prepared for that, it never ended up devastating. We never lost because an opponent double turned.
You know what we did lose because of, though? Rolling double ones into double ones on a charge roll.
Double ones into double ones on a charge.
That was insane.
And then we barely lost.
And
it was funny is our opponent saw us roll the double ones into double ones, and they went,
oh, thank God.
Thank God.
Because we had a 5-inch charge with a +2 to the roll.
And we double ones
it. Oh, yep. Frustrating.
But like
it's neither here nor there.
In AoS now, the double turn's not even really a thing. It's,
right, because your opponent, if they choose to double turn, sacrifices so much game momentum and overall point value.
Scoring.
Yeah, to take the double turn to get maybe a slight advantage.
It's now a better...
But it's like, it doesn't feel worth it to take the double turn most of the time.
It's actually like, if you're in the lead, it's better to not do it. Whereas if you're... I feel like the double turn is better for a person who's behind.
I feel like double turning is worth it in turns 4 to 5, more so than it is turns 2 to 3.
Because it used to be
1 to 2.
Right. It used to. So what's funny is Games Workshop games are oftentimes associated with the Alpha Strike, which is that bottom of 1, top of 2, and the double turn used to feel like it proved that.
Right.
And now...
Because there was no penalty. There was no problem.
No.
There was no disadvantage to taking bottom of 1 and the top of 2.
And in Warhammer 40K, like what happened is because a lot of tournaments did player place terrain, they would like hide their units, turtle their units, top of 1. So they would pop out bottom of 1, get an Alpha Strike turn, and then like that would be the same kind of feeling.
Right.
And in AoS now, it's like, well, if you do get the double turn, you kind of want to save it for if you're either way out in front,
or as a comeback
mechanic.
Right.
Yeah. So now it's like it's far more tactical in its application. And while people say, well, if they have to keep modifying it to make it that way, why don't they just get rid of it and make it you go, I go? And it's like, well, they've decided that this is a part of the identity of the game of Age of Sigmar, and so that's why they kept it. And while they started this edition with a modification to it, they've then since made a War Scroll modification to it.
They've made like 2 more modifications to it.
And it's like
great.
It is great.
I think it's super cool.
And at that tournament even we did, which was just a 1-day 3-round RTT style, it was like every round I played against a person who handled it differently when they had the opportunity.
Right.
So,
except for me, who went 3-0, who went top of 1, lost the priority roll, All 3 games, I got double turned 1 into 2, and guess what? I won all 3
still
games.
won.
I literally
that
won.
narrative of the idea that, well, if you get the double turn, you give like an 80 million% win
right,
percent. It's like, no, you don't.
It's just not
you
the
don't.
case. It's like, if you plan around it, the only unit I had in contention, in danger, was a unit that was super durable. It's like, I don't care if I get double turned. My opponent gave up their secondaries in order to take the double turn to try to gain an advantage. And guess what? It didn't gain them an advantage.
Well, and the other thing that happens is because AoS is so combat focused, and because combat, no matter whose turn it is truly alternating, it doesn't end up that massive an advantage. And while people think, well, if you've got like a lot of magic or a lot of shooting, you can take advantage of it. It's like, well, sort of, but those armies are almost universally giving up then the combat phase.
Right.
And so,
because you have to spend so many more points to get a wizard or to get a priest. And you have the counterplay of the enemy trying to counterspell you.
If you look at the armies that try to take advantage of range, Sylvaneth, by the way, does not have a good win rate. Disciples of Tzeentch does range via magic. Caradrons with shooting, but it's like those armies. Lumineth can, but they can also build a totally different way.
Yeah, right.
So
you just go straight up hammer.
Lumineth is a wonderful. By the way, if you love high elves, they can play either combat or range.
Right.
But if you look at the armies that take advantage of range, like their win rate is not spectacular. They're middle of the road. And it's because they have to pay a premium for that range in Age of Sigmar. So even if they go to take the double turns or whatever, it's like they are sacrificing scoring that they don't have a way to make up.
Well, especially in this new edition, and they've kind of flattened a lot of it.
Yep.
Right, where a lot of shooting centric units, you pay a premium for.
Yeah.
Right, like look at Stormcast units, right, that shoot Judicators, which are being squatted or retired in the following year. Right, Sent to Legends are 200 points for 5 of them. That's a massive tax. There are no units basically in Stormcast Eternals that are shooting units dedicated that cost less than 200 points.
And even in armies like
that's rough.
Skaven. So Skaven has phenomenal shooting, but those shooting packages, it's like, well, to really make them work, it's a
once per army per turn. Plus a character unit, plus the unit itself.
You need an engineer, you need a weapons team, you need a whatever, and it's like to get that. You're looking at 500, 600, 700 points, and it's like, and it's fragile. It's on 5-up saves, T-shirt saves.
It's just not. It's cool. It's not great,
and it's good, but it dies super easy. Yep. And in AoS, like getting into combat is not a rough challenge. Like in 40K. It's funny, so I'll say this, I'll give Games Workshop credit, and 40K has got to be a difficult game to balance because it's range-centric, and ranged games are hard to balance. But they have now made some combat armies, right now, Blood Angels and Orcs in particular, are performing...
World Eaters?
World Eaters. Yeah. They perform well. They get units into combat.
Blood Knights? Or Blood Angels?
But to get armies into combat in 40K, they have to have exceptional rules. They have to take advantage of terrain.
And that's one thing we talked about before is that in player place terrain, Dark Angels and Blood Angels are shit. However, in like the
US Open GW
US Open type style where there's
tournament packet
terrain, those armies are amazing.
Yeah.
Because the terrain is set up so that these units can jump from piece to piece without being targeted ever.
Yeah.
And get into their combat and get their full effectiveness without being whittled down before they get there.
And so you look at that, and first of all the curmudgeons need to credit GW with designing mission packs that make it so combat units can play.
Right.
And then they have to give those combat units like over-tuned melee rules to make up for the fact that they're going to get shot at for 2 or 3 turns.
I mean, we've been saying that for a long time, that melee dedicated units need to have better stats than they do. Because so many of them die before they get there. Reavers. I mean, I guess all Phobos units. I know you laugh at Reavers as being a thing, but all Phobos units for Space Marines in general are just, they're so bad.
Yep.
Because they don't have the stats to compensate for the fact that they are just power armor Marines that want to get into combat.
Yep.
right? You've got like Sanguinary Guard are amazing. Because they can have a 2-up save and they move 12 inches and they've got 5 fucking attacks
billion
and 2
power
damage
weapon
and
attacks,
whatever their attack characteristic. Whereas you've got Reavers that are 6-inch move, 3-up save, 2 attacks at no rend. Like, it's insane how those 2 units cost the same thing.
What pistols?
Right? They cost the same fucking amount.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Or maybe it's a 2-point difference, whatever. But it doesn't make any sense. There are so many units that just like are good because they got the stats to compensate for the fact that they're going to die on the way in, and then so many units that just aren't worth it because they don't have the stats to compensate for the fact that how many lose on the way in. That's all Phobos, right? Once they get that dialed in, we're going to see like a good Space Marine balanced codex. Once they get that figured out. God damn it. Maybe that'll take, Divergent chapters becoming their own supplements to become
Salamanders, hint, hint, hint.
Salamanders is the first one, hint, which we talked about last week.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it'll take, right? Maybe that's what it'll take for Gravis Marines to become good, because there's pretty much 0 Gravis Marines that are worth taking.
You know what's interesting though is like it's I think although 40K is in a relatively good spot, I do think that balancing a game around combat is a little, dare I say, simpler than balancing a game around shooting, because like being able to do damage without touching something, being able to do damage from turn 1 is really hard to cost appropriately, to stat appropriately, and Age of Sigmar's advantage is like they found this sweet spot where by only having a handful of armies with good ranged and then pricing them that way, but then giving them combat options, it's like they've made it so it's like, well, shooting armies don't dominate Age of Sigmar, but they're still playable. Right. And then like
you just got to be smart about it.
And then make the battlefield shorter and make every army have a way to get into the fray where everything's going to happen, and then truly alternate combat has made it so like Age of Sigmar just plays out.
You're right. Like charge equals fight first is a bad mechanic.
It is.
I don't like
and in 40K, everything that charges goes first. So like the whole point of combat armies is they try to set up that turn where they dance around terrain and then have a turn where all of their army charges at once.
Right.
Because they want to, I need all my stuff to go.
Works, right? Like,
yeah.
Same kind of.
The Beast Snagga version of their build is that way, where it's like, I need everything to charge at the same time so I get to go without you going.
And then if enough
Blood Angels do
fight,
it. Yeah.
None of your stuff get back.
Or it fights back paltry.
Because I've wiped it out.
Yeah. So it's interesting is that like in 40K, for them to make 40K work, we mentioned this, but it bears repeating that like in 40K to make melee armies work, they have to really overtune the combat units and then make these terrain situations where the combat units can hop, and then get in. And then they have to make it so that when you charge, you go first. So all of that has to play out. And they've got it where you've got Blood Angels armies have posted results, or some Orc armies have done it.
Dark Angels,
Marnius Calgar, but his unit on its own does it.
Yep.
They have to make it so that's how overtuned they are to do it. In Age of Sigmar, I feel like it's like
even just like mediocre units.
Yeah.
Just fighting deals damage.
Yep.
know?
And everything in Age of Sigmar, every army has units that can fight, and the shooting is at such a premium that like you can't actually have that alpha strike at range and win.
Right.
You have to get in close, and that gives the opponent opportunities to get to you.
Even like units in their ranges in this 4th edition of Age of Sigmar, they've reduced the overall range of the units from like 36 inches down to 24.
That same friend I was talking about,
24 down to 18,
who hadn't looked at the game since 2.0, said that he's looking through some of his armies, and he was like, "Oh, this range is only 18 now." I was like, and I said to him, but he actually felt encouraged by it. I was like, no, range in the game in general has come down.
Right.
Like, not a ton, but it was like one level, because their ranges were in like these 6-inch increments, and it was like everything that was 30 is now 24, everything is 24 is now 18, and so on. And you pay a price for it. And,
big price.
And there's
adjudicators are 200 points.
Yeah, and there's like less rend at that range.
Being retired, by the way.
In June, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know what's weird is we're in like almost the middle of February. That's like 1/6 through the year.
Yeah.
But
I don't want to talk about math.
no. But yeah, and it's like, but Age of Sigmar is so revolved around melee that like the action happens in the middle of the table, and that kind of gives every army a chance, and it's. They found a way to make 40K feel balanced in the sense that when you look at their top 8s for GTs and then LVO that just happened, and we'll see it at Adepticon if this continues, 40K has found some semblance of, but we're kind of late in 10th edition, so it's like a mature edition.
Right.
Age of Sigmar 4.0 is brand new. We're at our 5th book, and it's like, but they're seeing a diversity of results, and I think it's because it's like we said,
armies we haven't seen in years have popped up on GT wins.
Yeah, and I think balancing around melee that 24 inches and in, I think is a little easier when everything fights at that range. I don't know. I mean, I know we sound biased, but it's just like I don't know. Age of Sigmar is just great.
Yeah.
In that regard. And so we're excited for all these.
Regardless of that, though,
yeah,
my mind has been turning to like Necromunda. Recently.
Necromunda, okay.
Recently, honestly, Necromunda.
I've had some friends. We've had some friends in the store talking about Kill Team and Necromunda in particular.
And it's like
skirmish games,
mostly because it's like not because these are the best games, because these are the games that people are interested in. I kind of want to get in and paint the armies that I have for it just to participate.
These little small skirmishy,
small,
10-man,
10 to 12 models.
Yeah.
I had some ideas for one of my kill teams for Necromunda, which isn't represented in the new rule, which is the Ash Wastes, which is the Corpse Grinder cult, which are court cultists that just are all melee. Basically with like chain axes. They don't really have rules for the Ash Waste Nomads expansion of Necromunda, but I could see totally coming up with something that makes them work. Playing them as Goliaths or something like that. Because I've got a couple of kits of Goliath bikers that I haven't actually put together yet.
Okay.
And I could totally see converting them into like Corpse Grinder bikes that have like... So my idea is the Goliath bikes are like these like big wheel.
I love models like
me too.
Almost entirely. Like
me too.
Entire range.
If I wasn't playing Corpse Grinder, I would go with Scryer, because Scryer is always my love of the, like this setting of just being like the rich nobles of just wanting to kill people because they're sociopaths.
Yeah.
I love that. But the Corpse Grinder cult doesn't have their own rules for Ash Wastes yet. But having Goliath bikers be in place of Corpse Grinder cult bikes kind of thing could mean that like you could have models that are modeled so that they have these big wheeled like grinder blades in the front and like a bag of bits at the back. Basically, they're like scooping up blood and viscera from the sand.
Do you think
as they run people over?
Do you think their power wheels are like? Do you think they are the Power Wheels brand? Do you think in the future that's what they decided is like we're going to make weapon? We're going to make weaponized vehicles for the gangs.
Let's take our cars for kids, beef them up. Batteries are no problem now.
Nope.
Put blades and size underneath of them, and just chop people up as they run them over.
It's cheap.
Why not?
Cheap.
Yeah.
I think if I did Necromunda, I really like the. I think my painting style would lend itself to Vansar, which are the high tech guys.
Right.
But I love the, what are they called? Iron Weld? Or no, the squats.
Oh, the
I'm thinking Age of Sigmar. But what are the squats called now?
What are they called? The Iron Head Prospectors?
That's it.
Okay.
So like I actually really like the Votann aesthetic. I've seen people complain that they wish the Necromunda aesthetic was the army aesthetic, and I disagree. I think if you're talking about a standing army for an empire or whatever, they need to be very advanced, and
right.
the Votann are perfect for 40K. This version of them for Necromunda, though, I love the trench coats.
I really like the quad and the battle suits,
the minor tech,
the
like. Because I don't think any of that would actually work on a battlefield. I think they would get obliterated.
Sure.
But for Necromunda, when you're talking about gang fights and mining right. and scrapping for resources, I love their aesthetic for that. Those models look fun to me.
Yeah, I think I really like, my favorite one is the Corpse Grinder cult. My second one is the Vansar, which is the high-tech chem tech.
We got a buddy who really likes the Delac, House Delac.
Shit, that might be me.
They're really pale.
Oh, those are the ones I wanted to use for my
There's a Q
my
in the
witch
word
hunter
for some
cult.
reason. Okay, yeah.
My witch hunters. But I also like the Spirers, which are the high-tech like nobles. Those are my three favorite ones, which are
The ones who wear like fur-lined coats and shit.
well, they're the ones that are like in super duper high tech that like just descend into the hive to kill people for no reason.
It's fun.
They're
bored.
Yeah. It's the rich nobles who want to hunt people. They don't get advancements. They don't get upgrades. They just show up to kill people. I think that's hilarious to me. But I was thinking about running sort of a campaign style thing with a few people that that was based in Necromunda and in the Ash Wastes to experience some of the new stuff. Because the Ash Waste nomads are super cool.
Yeah.
And they've got all this terrain that have these basically elevated like stilt habs with like weapons on them and stuff like that. And like between that and then like the fact that there are vaults basically the underground that have stuff in them that you can loot and plunder, and then there's like unknown threats within, whether it be Gene Stealer cult or whatever, and these biologist models basically that are like experimenting on the Gene Stealers. I think that could be a really cool campaign for just a few players.
You know what's funny is I think that Necromunda, more so than Warhammer 40. So the Warhammer 40K is incredibly rich, and we know Henry Cavill's working with Amazon to do some shit for them. But like, and we know the Horus Heresy novels are fantastic, and like, but it's like I think if a live action series, like I actually think Necromunda would be a more interesting angle on the 40K front, because like I don't like the idea of a live action series where you're going to name drop these big chapter masters or chaos lords or whatever.
You show these important characters that have
because
and then you could either do them right or do them wrong.
And doing them wrong is in the nerd community is going to end up a bigger crime than whatever.
Right.
And it's like with Age of Sigmar, it's the same thing. I feel like if they did sort of the Warhammer Plus approach, where it's like you approach these stories from within a city in one of the mortal realms, that's better than doing the name drop of the big demigod characters.
Right.
And if you're going to do a 40K, I feel like Necromunda is an opportunity to do really fascinating, gritty stories.
Look at Angels of Death, the Blood Angel one where they were on that planet. Infested with Gene Stealer cult.
Yep.
I think that was phenomenal. There was zero name characters.
Very well done. That was like, partially fan made, right?
There was no idea of like when it took place.
Nope.
There was nothing. It was great. I loved Angels of Death. Oh, that was super cool. The Supercut, where it was just a movie, what I think was the best version of it. Because I watched all 10 episodes of the unedited, version, and it was good.
Yeah.
But the supercut of the movie was great.
Yep.
So like something like that, but Necromunda instead, great. I think that'd be phenomenal.
And Necromunda, it's like you pick a hive world, of which there are thousands in the 40K universe, and then you can include any faction. You can include it down to a very personal level if you want to make relatable characters.
Right.
And what is life like what is everyday life? So one thing that gets lost in the greater scope of things is like the 40K universe, while it's immersed in war, it's like there are literally quadrillions of people, humans, Tau, Eldari, whatever race, who live everyday lives and are not involved in the war, but their worlds or their systems or whatever might be affected by it. And like that is what I think Necromunda can touch on, is like this everyday life happening while war is happening.
Right. But separated from the war.
But separated from the war, right?
It's not impacting the wars.
And not to get like geopolitical, but it's like you look at things like there are parts of Russia and Ukraine that still live everyday life, even though they have a war going on.
Like we've seen that even recently. Places in Ukraine are being bombed and attacked.
Yeah.
But there are like notifications that we get that were like, hey, this city in Ukraine was bombed, and it was a surprise because they've been living the last 2 years as a normal life, even though their countries are technically at war.
And one of the things I do, I don't talk about it, but for work, so you have like the conflict in Israel and Gaza.
That's another one.
And like, but we just had an area where business reopened in a part of Israel, and so because there are still parts of that little sliver of the world where normal life still happens, quote unquote, where they're not directly affected by the war. And like Necromunda, to me, it's like, yes, there's fighting involved in Necromunda, but there's more than that. And it's apart from the galactic wars taking place.
Right. Yeah, the wars of like the maledictum and stuff doesn't affect Necromunda at all.
No.
Right?
You have
Like,
a random planet
give
and a system with trillions of people, and like they're just living everyday lives that aren't involved in a direct war.
Like make their own, cut their own, path
Their battles are like corporations and government agencies and gangs and all the stuff that fight with each other in a normal everyday way. Like, and that's what's fascinating. I feel like Warhammer Plus touches on some of it, not enough, fast enough. But I feel like if they're going to do all these like TV shows, it's like there's a story you can tell. It's just in the 40K setting. Pick a random part of the universe, don't name drop, and give us that story.
Or like I feel like the Assassin episode of Hammer and Bolter did a very similar thing.
Yeah.
Right, where it's like a very small, isolated event within the greater story was shown, like this assassination of this rogue agent of the Imperium that wasn't adhering to the plan, and they assassinated him, and successfully, I would throw that out there. They did successfully do it. Spoilers. But it was that kind of thing where it's like a small story where it doesn't have an impact on the greater story.
No,
but it's still
you're
like
dealing with
world building.
You're dealing with a galaxy of stuff going on, and in like Age of Sigmar, you're dealing with these entire realms of stuff going on, and so you have to have these like
You need to shrink it down.
These down to earth style stories that take place just in the universe that don't involve the greater wars.
Was it a Hammer Bolter episode of Age of Sigmar where they did the?
There's been new episodes up that I haven't seen yet.
But,
yeah,
Hamilcar Bear Eater. That guy, where he like challenges the war boss solo and fucking just obliterates him.
That was a great
and
episode.
like he was like, I have
He's a named guy for Stormcast.
He's like, hey, I've got, but he's not named in the rules. He's not named in the story. He's like, hey, I've got the rules.
Was he an Underworld's warband?
No, never. He is.
Does he have a model?
He is just in story alone.
Does he have a model?
No.
Does he have a model? Are
you
sure?
There was a Golden Demon entry where someone converted him. But there's no model for him.
Really?
Hamilcar Bear Eater. He is just in story, in lore alone. But
Hamilcar, they chose that
Hamilcar,
name, which was the name of the progenitor of Hannibal.
Hamilcar.
The Carthaginian general who hated Rome, Hamilcar Barca, was the guy who was opposed to Rome and taught his children to hate Rome. And like,
Hamilcar
anyway,
Bear Eater.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
He was a Celestant who like roamed, who was like a bard.
He had a beard and
he was like a roaming bard. And in the Warhammer Plus episode, he challenged the war boss.
Great character.
And all of his like champions and loses to them, and then eventually challenges the war boss himself and fucking kills him in single combat. It was like, hey guys, I got all the secrets of reforging. Whichever one of you orcs is strongest gets it. Fight each other now. Go. And they just like killed each other.
Yeah.
It was such a hilarious episode. It was great. I loved it so much because it was like, what an interesting and like,
you know what it was. You know what it was for me.
So
in the Age of Sigmar universe, it was similar to me of what the Eisenhorn moment was in 40K. So Eisenhorn did a thing where it was like, we have this orc tribe that's a problem. We have a Tyranid fleet inbound. So they took a gene stealer who had these pheromones that would attract a hive fleet. Because gene stealers and lictors infiltrate a planet early. They drop the pheromones or they start a cult or whatever it is that attracts a hive fleet. So they dropped it in this planet that's overrun by orcs. And so Tyranids were drawn to it instead of where he was afraid they were going to go. And I think Eldar helped him, but whatever. And these Tyranids showed up there, which drew orcs because orcs are like, hey, there's fighting.
I like fighting.
So these orcs showed up. And now these orcs and Tyranids are fighting, and that perpetuated the situation where like orcs are like, well, I want a good fight. These Tyranids present a good fight because they adapt to us and then fight harder. And the Tyranids then absorbed orc DNA and changed, and then the orcs grew stronger because like this is a tougher fight.
What's the difference between orcs and Tyranids? I don't understand.
And Kroot.
And Kroot.
And crew do the same thing, right?
And crew do the
And
same
so,
thing.
so like orcs will.
What's the difference?
Orcs will change if the fight gets harder. They'll grow bigger, stronger,
Right.
fightier. Tyranids will change because it's like, well, we need to do this new thing because this organism's whatever, and it's purely biological. And then crew will be like, well,
Hey, I ate this thing and I learned something.
and I learned something from its DNA. And so Eisenhorn basically set this up, and the idea was it bought them time because these orcs and Tyranids now fought each other. It bought them time to come up with a solution because they knew the problem, which was avoided at first, would create a second problem, but it bought them time to solve it, which was whoever comes out of this fight, the problem was either the Tyranids are going to come out with so much genetic adaptations that they are unstoppable, or the orcs are going to come out so big and furious that they are unstoppable, but we have time. But in Age of Sigmar, I feel like that character, what's his name again? Hamilcar. It was that moment.
Yeah.
And people, again, like we started this episode, people need to read Age of Sigmar fluff because Hamilcar's fluff, that was his Eisenhorn moment where it's like
Right.
he created this like iconic.
And he went down there and got his ass kicked
Yep.
5 times
Yep.
in order to get an audience with the war boss.
Yes.
And then when the war boss fought, like the fight started, he fucking owned him.
Oh yeah.
Is instantly like, and you're dead.
It-
and he
it-
killed him. And
it-
he's like, I'm the war boss
It
now.
was a classic pool hustler move
Right.
where it's like Fast Frost Eddie or these pool sharks. Nobody
Sure,
listening is going to know what that is.
Like Fast Frost Eddie,
Yeah.
exactly.
No one's going to know what that is. Or Minnesota Fats, right? Here's a nerd who knows other things, right? And like it was, you lose 4 times in a row to then
Right.
make a bet on the 5th game.
Right. That's exactly what Hamilcar did.
Yes.
That was the bet. Is I lose 4 times in a row, up the stakes every single time, and eventually the guy is so overconfident that he can beat you that he challenges you and you whoop his ass immediately.
Well,
and you win.
And you know what's funny is
Take him for everything.
Is Hamilcar in ancient Carthage, his son Hannibal Barca did the same thing where it's like, oh, I'm stuck in Italy. I have no reinforcements. I'm gonna set myself up to fight Rome and Cannae, and then I'm going to draw them into this battle where they seem advantageous. I'm going to look like I'm losing, but I'm setting it up to do this like ambush pincer move. I win.
Boom. That's exactly
Mic
AoS.
drop.
That's AoS lore right there.
Boom.
Happen. And then it confused all of the other AoS Celestins who were watching. Were like, what the fuck just happened? I guess we get to save the city because this one guy went in there and made all the orcs fight each other.
Ha ha.
All right. Who's this guy? I don't remember.
I loved that episode, by the way. It was so good.
Great. It was so good.
Warhammer Plus is good, man. I wish they did more episodes. That should be like a weekly show.
Yep, agreed.
You know what else we should do weekly?
Eat.
Eat.
I think we should eat every
I
week.
think we should eat every week.
Yeah. Let's do that.
eat.
Let's eat.
Thanks for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Follow us for more of our weekly episodes on YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and Podbean. You can follow myself and Llama on Instagram. We are at Llama Paints Minis and Hyena Paints Minis. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. And as always, we'll catch you next time.